Marcus Rodriguez stood at the entrance of the prestigious military academy, his worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The grand stone buildings towered above him like ancient castles, their windows gleaming in the morning sun. Other cadets walked past him with confident strides, their expensive luggage wheeled behind them by hired helpers. Marcus clutched his acceptance letter tighter, the paper already creased from his nervous handling. The son of a janitor and a diner waitress, Marcus had never imagined he would step foot in such a place. His neighborhood back home was filled with broken streetlights and abandoned buildings. The closest thing to military tradition there was his grandfather's old army medals, stored in a shoebox under his bed. But Marcus had something burning inside him that couldn't be contained by his circumstances. His journey to this moment began 3 years earlier, when a military recruiter visited his struggling high school. While other students threw paper airplanes and whispered jokes, Marcus sat in the front row absorbing every word. The recruiter spoke of honor, service, and opportunities that could transform a person's entire life. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He started waking up at 5 in the morning, running through the dangerous streets of his neighborhood while most people were still asleep. He studied military history in the public library, reading until the librarian had to ask him to leave. His grades, which had been average at best, suddenly soared as he discovered a purpose bigger than himself. The application process was grueling. Marcus had no connections, no recommendations from influential people, and no family history of military service. What he had was determination and a score on the entrance exam that shocked even himself. When the acceptance letter arrived at his apartment, his mother cried tears of joy while his father simply nodded with quiet pride. Now, standing before the academy, Marcus felt the weight of their sacrifices. His parents had worked double shifts to buy him the required items. His mother had sewn name tags into his clothing by hand, her fingers working late into the night. They couldn't afford to drive him to the academy, so he had taken 3 different buses, traveling for nearly 12 hours with transfers. As he walked through the main gate, other cadets glanced at him with curiosity and sometimes with barely concealed disdain. His clothes, though clean and pressed, were clearly from discount stores. His shoes, while polished to perfection, showed signs of wear. He didn't have the easy confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege, but he had something else that many of his peers lacked. The first person to speak to him was a tall, blond cadet named Harrison Whitfield III. His family name was etched on buildings throughout the academy grounds. Harrison looked Marcus up and down with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to judging people by their appearance. "You must be lost," Harrison said with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The community college is about 20 miles down the road." Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez. I'm here for orientation." Harrison's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Rodriguez? Are you sure you have the right school? This is a military academy, not a social program." Other cadets nearby began to take notice of the exchange. Some laughed quietly, while others simply stared with uncomfortable expressions. Marcus realized this was his first test, though not one that would appear in any official handbook. "I earned my place here," Marcus said quietly, his hand still gripping his acceptance letter. "Same as everyone else." Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Marcus. "Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. You don't belong here. This isn't about charity cases or diversity quotas. This is about tradition, honor, and breeding. You might have fooled some admissions officer with a sob story, but you won't fool us. Save yourself the embarrassment and leave now." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he refused to step backward. He had heard similar things before in different forms from different people. Teachers who had low expectations, neighbors who said he was dreaming too big, even well-meaning relatives who suggested he should be more realistic about his future. But standing there, surrounded by centuries of military tradition and excellence, Marcus felt something crystallize inside him. He wasn't just fighting for his own dreams anymore. He was fighting for every kid like him who had been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to reach for something better. "I appreciate the advice," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But I didn't come this far to turn around now. I guess we'll see what happens." Harrison's smile faltered slightly, perhaps sensing something in Marcus that he hadn't expected to find. The other cadets began to disperse, but Marcus could feel their eyes on him as he walked toward the dormitory building. That first night, alone in his small room while sounds of laughter and conversation echoed from other parts of the building, Marcus unpacked his few belongings. He placed his grandfather's Purple Heart on his desk, the only valuable thing his family owned. It served as a reminder that courage wasn't about where you came from, but about what you were willing to do when everything seemed impossible. He opened his notebook and wrote his first entry. Day 1. They think I don't belong here. Maybe they're right about where I came from, but they're wrong about where I'm going. Outside his window, the academy grounds stretched out under the starlight, beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. Somewhere in those buildings were classrooms where he would be tested, training grounds where he would be pushed to his limits, and traditions that went back generations. Marcus Rodriguez, the janitor's son from the wrong side of town, was about to begin the fight of his life. He didn't know it yet, but this fight would take him places he had never imagined, and would ultimately lead to a moment that would silence his critics forever. The journey of proving them wrong had officially begun. The alarm screamed at 4:30 in the morning, just as it had every day for the past 6 months. Marcus rolled out of his narrow bunk with practiced efficiency, his body moving automatically through the motions that had become second nature. Around him, other cadets groaned and stumbled in the darkness, but Marcus was already reaching for his perfectly arranged uniform. Training at the academy was designed to break people down before building them back up. For many of his wealthy classmates, this was the first time in their lives they had faced genuine hardship. Marcus watched them struggle with tasks that reminded him of his childhood, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, doing laundry by hand, surviving on minimal sleep and basic food. Sergeant Major Thompson, a career military man with eyes like steel and a voice that could cut through concrete, seemed to take special pleasure in testing Marcus. During their first week of physical training, he had pulled Marcus aside. "Rodriguez, I've seen your file. Impressive test scores for someone from your background. But test scores don't mean much when bullets start flying. Show me you belong here or pack your bags." The physical training was brutal. 5-mile runs before breakfast, obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone who hated cadets, and combat drills that left everyone exhausted and sore. But Marcus discovered something that surprised even him. All those early morning runs through his dangerous neighborhood had prepared him better than expensive private trainers had prepared his classmates. While Harrison Whitfield struggled to complete the obstacle course, Marcus moved through it with fluid efficiency. His body, hardened by years of physical labor helping his father with odd jobs, adapted quickly to the demands. What he lacked in formal training, he made up for with raw determination and a work ethic that impressed even the toughest instructors. Academic classes presented different challenges. Military history, strategy, leadership principles, and advanced mathematics filled their days. Many of his classmates had attended elite preparatory schools with small class sizes and personal tutors. Marcus had attended an overcrowded public school where textbooks were outdated and teachers were overwhelmed. But Marcus had learned something valuable during those long hours in the public library. He knew how to learn independently, how to find information and absorb it quickly. While other cadets complained about the workload, Marcus saw it as an opportunity. Every night after lights out, he would read by flashlight under his blanket, determined not to fall behind. His breakthrough came during a military strategy exercise in their 3rd month. The class was divided into teams and given a complex scenario involving a trapped unit behind enemy lines. Each team had to develop a rescue plan and present it to the class. Most teams relied on conventional tactics they had memorized from textbooks. Marcus's team struggled at first. His teammates, including 2 cadets from military families, initially dismissed his suggestions. But as the deadline approached and their conventional approaches proved inadequate, they began to listen. Marcus had been thinking about the problem differently, drawing on his experience of navigating dangerous situations in his old neighborhood. "What if we don't go around the enemy?" he suggested during a late-night planning session. "What if we go through them, but not where they expect us to?" His plan was unconventional, risky, and brilliant. Instead of avoiding the enemy stronghold, his strategy used it as cover for an approach they would never anticipate. When his team presented the plan, the classroom fell silent. Even the instructor, a decorated colonel, sat forward in his chair. "Cadet Rodriguez," the colonel said after a long pause, Where did you learn to think like that? I grew up in a place where sometimes the dangerous path was the only way home, sir, Marcus replied. The colonel smiled for the first time that semester. Outstanding work, all of you. Word of Marcus's strategic thinking began to spread through the academy. Instructors who had initially been skeptical started paying closer attention to his contributions. His classmates, who had once looked at him with suspicion or pity, began to see him differently. But success brought new challenges. Harrison Whitfield and his circle of influential friends saw Marcus's rising reputation as a threat to their assumed superiority. The subtle harassment escalated. Equipment would mysteriously disappear from Marcus's locker. His assignments would be accidentally damaged. During group exercises, he would find himself excluded from planning sessions. The breaking point came during a particularly challenging field training exercise. Cadets were divided into squads and dropped in a remote area with minimal supplies. They had to navigate back to base camp while completing various objectives along the way. It was designed to test everything they had learned about leadership, teamwork, and survival. Marcus found himself assigned to a squad with Harrison and several of his allies. From the moment they were dropped off, it was clear they intended to sabotage his performance. When Marcus suggested a route that would avoid difficult terrain, Harrison overruled him. When Marcus volunteered to take point during a dangerous river crossing, Harrison assigned him to carry extra equipment instead. But the real test came on their second night when one of their squad mates, a quiet cadet named Johnson, fell seriously ill with what appeared to be food poisoning. Harrison's response was to suggest they leave Johnson behind and continue the mission. According to the rules, they could call for medical evacuation, but it would result in automatic failure for the entire squad. We can't risk everyone's grade for one person, Harrison argued. Johnson knew the risks when he signed up. Marcus looked at Johnson, who was clearly getting worse, than at the rest of the squad. Some looked uncomfortable with Harrison's decision, but no one was willing to challenge him directly. We're not leaving him, Marcus said quietly. You don't get to make that decision, Rodriguez. I'm the squad leader. Then I'll carry him myself. For the next 18 hours, Marcus carried Johnson on his back while navigating treacherous terrain. The extra weight was exhausting, but Marcus refused to slow down or complain. Other squad members, shamed by his example, began taking turns helping with Johnson's equipment and supplies. They reached base camp 6 hours behind schedule, all of them exhausted and covered in mud. According to the official rules, they had failed the exercise, but Sergeant Major Thompson was waiting for them with an expression Marcus couldn't read. Rodriguez, front and center, Thompson barked. Marcus stepped forward, expecting the worst. Instead, Thompson studied him for a long moment before speaking. In 23 years of military service, I've learned that the true measure of a soldier isn't how fast they can run or how well they can shoot. It's what they do when everything goes wrong and no one is watching. You carried that cadet 18 miles through difficult terrain when you could have left him behind. That's not in any manual, son. That's character. He turned to address the entire group of cadets who had gathered to watch. This exercise was designed to test your leadership under pressure. Cadet Rodriguez demonstrated real leadership today, the kind we need in our military. As Thompson walked away, Marcus felt something shift around him. The other cadets were looking at him with new respect, even some who had previously ignored him. Harrison's face was red with anger and embarrassment, but he said nothing. That night, Johnson, who was recovering in the medical facility, sent Marcus a note. Thank you for not leaving me behind. I won't forget this. Neither would anyone else who witnessed it. Marcus Rodriguez was no longer just the poor kid who didn't belong. He was becoming something much more dangerous to his critics, a leader worth following. 2 years had passed since Marcus first walked through the academy gates, and the transformation was remarkable. The uncertain young man who had clutched his acceptance letter had evolved into someone who commanded attention when he entered a room. His shoulders were broader, his walk more confident, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had been tested and had not been found wanting. The academy's rigid hierarchy was based on merit, leadership ability, and the respect of peers and instructors. Marcus had steadily climbed through the cadet ranks, earning each promotion through demonstrated excellence rather than family connections or financial influence. He now wore the insignia of a senior cadet, a position that came with real responsibility and the authority to lead younger students. His reputation had spread beyond the academy walls. During a joint training exercise with cadets from other military schools, Marcus had led a tactical simulation that resulted in a decisive victory. The opposing team's instructor, a Marine colonel, had specifically requested to meet the cadet who designed that flanking maneuver. When he learned that Marcus was a scholarship student from a working-class family, the colonel's respect only increased. "Son," the Marine had said, "I've been watching military tactics for 30 years. What you did out there was textbook perfect, except it wasn't from any textbook I know. You've got natural instincts that can't be taught." But success at the academy was only part of Marcus's story. He had also become a bridge between different worlds within the institution. Many cadets from backgrounds similar to his own looked up to him as proof that they could succeed. He mentored struggling students, helped them navigate the social complexities of academy life, and showed them that excellence was possible regardless of their origins. At the same time, Marcus had earned grudging respect from many cadets who had initially dismissed him. His consistent performance, unwavering integrity, and natural leadership abilities had won over even some of his harshest critics. The academy valued results above all else, and Marcus consistently delivered results. Harrison Whitfield remained a notable exception. As Marcus's star continued to rise, Harrison's own performance became increasingly mediocre in comparison. The natural leadership that many had assumed would accompany his privileged background never materialized. Instead, Harrison relied on intimidation, family connections, and manipulation to maintain his position. The tension between them came to a head during their final year, when both were competing for the position of brigade commander, the highest cadet rank at the academy. The selection process was grueling, involving academic performance, leadership evaluations, peer reviews, and a comprehensive assessment by the academy's senior staff. Marcus threw himself into the competition with characteristic intensity. He studied military leadership principles, analyzed historical battles, and worked to improve every aspect of his performance. His naturally competitive spirit, sharpened by years of proving himself, drove him to excel in ways that impressed even his instructors. The peer evaluation process was particularly revealing. Cadets were asked to anonymously rank their classmates on various leadership qualities. When the results were compiled, Marcus scored exceptionally high in categories like trustworthiness, decisiveness, and inspiration. Comments from his peers painted a picture of someone they would willingly follow into combat. "Rodriguez doesn't just give orders, he shows you how it's done," wrote one cadet. "He never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. I've seen him stay up all night helping struggling cadets with their studies, then ace his own exam the next morning," wrote another. That's the kind of leader we need. Harrison's evaluations told a different story. While some cadets praised his family's military tradition and his theoretical knowledge, many questioned his judgment under pressure and his treatment of subordinates. Several mentioned incidents where Harrison had used his connections to avoid consequences for poor decisions. The academic portion of the selection process favored Marcus significantly. His grades, which had started below average, were now among the top 5% of his class. His thesis on unconventional warfare tactics had been so impressive that it was being considered for publication in a military journal. But the final test was the most challenging. Each candidate had to lead a company of underclassmen through a complex field exercise that simulated combat conditions. They were evaluated on their ability to make quick decisions, adapt to changing circumstances, and maintain unit cohesion under stress. Marcus's exercise took place during a particularly difficult weather situation. Heavy rain had turned the training ground into a muddy obstacle course, and equipment failures complicated an already challenging scenario. Lesser leaders might have become frustrated or made excuses, but Marcus adapted quickly to the conditions. He repositioned his units to take advantage of the weather rather than fight against it. When communication equipment failed, he established alternative methods of coordination. When several cadets were injured during the exercise, he modified his tactics to ensure their safety while still completing the mission objectives. Most impressively, he maintained morale throughout the ordeal. Even as conditions worsened, his company remained focused and determined. They moved with precision and confidence, trusting their leader's decisions even when the reasoning wasn't immediately obvious. The observing instructors were visibly impressed. Colonel Harrison, the Academy's commandant and a distant relative of Cadet Harrison Whitfield, made notes throughout the exercise. At one point, he was heard telling another instructor, "That young man has natural command presence. His people trust him completely." When the exercise concluded, Marcus's company had achieved all primary objectives and most secondary ones despite the challenging conditions. More importantly, they had done so without compromising safety or unit integrity. The debriefing session revealed tactical decisions that demonstrated both creativity and solid military judgment. Harrison Whitfield's exercise, conducted under more favorable conditions, produced adequate results but lacked the innovation and leadership excellence that Marcus had demonstrated. His units completed their objectives, but without the cohesion and enthusiasm that had marked Marcus's performance. The selection committee met for 3 days to make their decision. The choice, they later admitted, was ultimately clear despite the political complications it might create. Marcus Rodriguez had simply outperformed every other candidate in every measurable category. When the announcement was made during the weekly cadet assembly, the reaction was mixed but telling. The majority of cadets erupted in applause, clearly pleased with the selection. A smaller group, primarily those from traditional military families, clapped politely but without enthusiasm. Harrison Whitfield's face during the announcement would be remembered by many who witnessed it. The shock and anger were barely concealed, and it was clear that he viewed Marcus's selection as a personal humiliation rather than a fair competition. But for Marcus, standing at attention as the commandant announced his appointment as brigade commander, the moment represented something much larger than personal achievement. He was now the highest-ranking cadet at an institution that had initially questioned his right to be there at all. That evening, as he called his parents to share the news, Marcus could hear the pride and disbelief in their voices. His mother cried, his father cleared his throat several times before speaking, and both told him how proud they were of what he had accomplished. "I always knew you were special, mijo," his mother said through her tears, "but this is more than we ever dreamed possible." Marcus looked out his window at the academy grounds, now his responsibility to help lead and protect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations, and undoubtedly new critics. But tonight he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The janitor's son had just been named the top cadet at one of the nation's most prestigious military academies. The boy who supposedly didn't belong was now in charge. 8 years after graduation, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez stood in the briefing tent, studying satellite images of enemy positions in a volatile region thousands of miles from home. The academy boy who had once been told he didn't belong was now commanding a battalion of elite soldiers in one of the military's most challenging operations. His journey from cadet to combat commander had been marked by consistent excellence and rapid advancement. After graduating at the top of his class, Marcus had been selected for the most competitive training programs the military offered: Ranger, School Advanced Infantry Officer Course, and ultimately, the prestigious War College had all added layers to his tactical knowledge and leadership abilities. But real war was different from any training exercise. The enemy didn't follow textbook patterns, equipment failures had life-or-death consequences, and the weight of command meant that every decision could determine whether his soldiers came home alive. Marcus had arrived in the theater of operations 6 months earlier, taking command of a battalion that had suffered significant losses under previous leadership. Morale was low, trust was broken, and the men were questioning whether their mission was achievable. The previous commander, a product of military aristocracy much like Harrison Whitfield, had relied on outdated tactics and had shown little concern for the welfare of his troops. The contrast was immediately apparent when Marcus took command. His first action was to visit every unit under his command, not for formal inspections but for genuine conversations with his soldiers. He ate meals with enlisted men, listened to their concerns, and demonstrated the same hands-on leadership style that had served him well at the academy. Sergeant First Class Williams, a career soldier with 15 years of experience, later described the change to his wife in a letter. "The new colonel is different. He actually cares about us getting home alive, and he knows how to make it happen. The guys would follow him anywhere." Marcus's tactical approach was equally revolutionary. Instead of relying solely on overwhelming firepower, he emphasized intelligence gathering. cultural understanding, and precision operations that minimized civilian casualties. His background had taught him to think creatively about problems, and he applied that same unconventional thinking to military challenges. His first major operation was a rescue mission to extract a captured intelligence officer from a heavily fortified enemy compound. Previous attempts by other units had failed, resulting in casualties and no progress. The prisoner had been held for 3 weeks, and intelligence suggested he was being moved to a location from which rescue would be impossible. Traditional military doctrine called for a large-scale assault on the compound, but Marcus saw several problems with that approach. The compound was in a populated area, making civilian casualties likely. The enemy was expecting a conventional attack and had prepared accordingly. Most importantly, a failed rescue attempt would almost certainly result in the prisoner's execution. Instead, Marcus developed a plan that seemed almost impossibly complex. His forces would create multiple diversions at different locations, drawing enemy attention away from the compound. A small team of his best soldiers would infiltrate the facility during the chaos, locate the prisoner, and extract him before the enemy could react. The operation required precise timing, perfect coordination, and a level of trust between units that many thought impossible to achieve. Marcus spent weeks preparing his forces, running simulations and adjusting every detail of the plan. He personally led training exercises that replicated the conditions they would face. When the mission launched, it unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Diversionary attacks began simultaneously at 3 different locations, creating confusion in enemy communications. The infiltration team, led by Marcus himself, penetrated the compound exactly as planned. The rescue itself took less than 12 minutes. Marcus's team located the prisoner, neutralized his guards, and extracted him through a predetermined route, while enemy forces were still responding to the diversionary attacks. By the time the enemy realized what had happened, the rescue team was already at the extraction point. The mission was a complete success with 0 casualties among Marcus's forces and minimal collateral damage. The rescued intelligence officer provided information that led to the disruption of several enemy operations. Military analysts called it a textbook example of how modern warfare should be conducted, but Marcus's most significant test came 3 months later, when his battalion was tasked with holding a strategic mountain pass against a much larger enemy force. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces outnumbered his battalion by nearly 4-1, and they were advancing with heavy weapons and air support. The pass was crucial to the broader military strategy. If the enemy captured it, they would have access to supply routes that could change the entire balance of power in the region. Marcus was ordered to hold the position at all costs, while reinforcements were mobilized. The traditional approach would have been to establish defensive positions and prepare for a siege. But Marcus recognized that his forces couldn't withstand a prolonged assault against such overwhelming odds. He needed a strategy that would neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage while maximizing his own forces' strengths. His solution was audacious and risky. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack his positions, Marcus decided to take the fight to them. He divided his battalion into smaller, highly mobile units that could strike enemy forces before they could organize for a major assault. The plan required his soldiers to operate independently in hostile territory, making quick strikes and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. It was dangerous, unconventional, and completely contrary to standard military doctrine for defensive operations. For 48 hours, Marcus's forces conducted a campaign of harassment that kept the much larger enemy force off balance and unable to advance. His units struck supply convoys, communication centers, and forward positions before melting back into the rugged terrain. The enemy commander, frustrated by his inability to bring his superior forces to bear effectively, made increasingly desperate attempts to locate and destroy Marcus's elusive units. These attempts only resulted in further casualties and confusion among enemy ranks. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found that Marcus's battalion had not only held the mountain pass, but had inflicted significant casualties on the enemy force, while suffering minimal losses themselves. The enemy commander, unable to achieve his objectives and facing mounting casualties, had ordered a withdrawal. The victory made Marcus a legend within military circles. The operation was studied at military academies around the world as an example of innovative tactics and exceptional leadership under extreme pressure. Marcus was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the military's highest honors. But for Marcus, the real victory was seeing his soldiers return home alive. The same creative thinking that had once helped him navigate his dangerous neighborhood had now saved lives in combat. The leadership skills he had developed while being told he didn't belong had proven themselves in the ultimate test of warfare. News of his military successes reached back to his old academy, where his portrait was added to the wall of distinguished graduates. The same institution that had once questioned his presence was now celebrating him as one of their most accomplished alumni. Harrison Whitfield, who had left military service after a mediocre career marked by political appointments rather than merit-based advancement, read about Marcus's achievements in military publications. The janitor's son had become one of the most respected combat commanders in the armed forces. As Marcus prepared for his next assignment, a promotion to full colonel and command of an entire brigade, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Every challenge that had once seemed designed to break him had instead made him stronger. Every person who had told him he didn't belong had motivated him to prove them wrong more completely than they could have imagined. The real test of war had not been against foreign enemies, but against the limitations others had tried to place on his potential. And he had won that war decisively. 15 years had transformed Colonel Marcus Rodriguez into one of the military's most decorated and respected officers. His chest bore ribbons that told the story of exceptional service across multiple theaters of operation. The Bronze Star, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, and Purple Heart were among the honors that marked a career defined by courage, innovation, and unwavering dedication to his soldiers. At 38, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had been tested in every way possible and had never been found wanting. His hair was beginning to show threads of gray at the temples, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent years in harsh conditions. But his eyes still held the same determined gleam that had carried him through his first difficult days at the academy. The assignment that would change everything came during a routine briefing at the Pentagon. Marcus was being considered for promotion to brigadier general, a milestone that would make him one of the youngest generals in the modern military. But first, there was one more assignment that required his immediate attention. A crisis had developed at his old military academy. A scandal involving corruption, hazing incidents, and leadership failures had shaken the institution to its core. Several cadets had been seriously injured, others had resigned in protest, and the media was demanding accountability. The academy's reputation, built over more than a century, was in serious jeopardy. The Secretary of Defense had decided that the situation required immediate intervention by someone with impeccable credentials and the moral authority to restore order. Marcus Rodriguez, the Academy's most distinguished recent graduate, was being asked to return as interim commandant while a complete investigation and restructuring took place. "Colonel, I won't lie to you," the secretary said during their private meeting. "This is a career-defining assignment. Success will likely guarantee your promotion to general and set you up for even higher command. But failure will be very public and it could end your military career." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Sir, that academy gave me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. If there's a chance I can help restore its honor and protect future cadets, I have to try." The flight back to the academy gave Marcus time to reflect on the strange turn his life had taken. He was returning to the place where he had once been told he didn't belong, but now as the person responsible for its future. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the weight of responsibility. When his car pulled through the academy gates, Marcus felt a flood of memories. The buildings looked exactly the same, their stone facades weathered but dignified. The parade grounds where he had struggled through his first formations were perfectly maintained. But there was something different in the atmosphere, a tension that hadn't existed during his cadet days. His first meeting was with the academic staff and senior instructors. Many of them remembered him as a cadet, and several had played roles in his development as a leader. Colonel Harrison, who had been the commandant during Marcus's time and was now nearing retirement, greeted him with visible relief. "Marcus, I can't tell you how glad I am to see you," the older man said. This place needs someone who understands what it's supposed to represent. Someone who earned their way here, rather than inheriting it. The problems Marcus inherited were more serious than the public reports had indicated. A culture of entitlement had developed among some cadets from prominent families, leading to hazing incidents that went far beyond traditional military discipline. Academic standards had been compromised by instructors who were afraid to fail cadets with influential connections. Most disturbing of all, several incidents of sexual assault had been covered up or minimally punished. Marcus spent his first week conducting private interviews with cadets, instructors, and staff members. What he discovered was an institution that had lost its way, where privilege and connections had begun to matter more than merit and character. The very problems that had made his own cadet experience difficult had metastasized into something that threatened the Academy's core mission. His approach to solving the crisis was characteristically direct and uncompromising. Marcus announced a series of reforms that would restore the Academy's focus on merit-based advancement and zero-tolerance policies for abuse of any kind. He restructured the honor code to close loopholes that had allowed influential cadets to escape consequences for misconduct. But his most controversial decision was to personally review the cases of every cadet who had been involved in the recent scandals. This included several students from powerful political and military families who had previously been given minimal punishments for serious infractions. The backlash was immediate and intense. Phone calls from senators, generals, and wealthy donors flooded the Academy's administration. Marcus was accused of conducting a witch hunt and overstepping his authority. Some critics suggested that his own background as a scholarship student had given him a bias against cadets from military families. The pressure campaign reached its peak when Harrison Whitfield's expression hardened. "You're making powerful enemies, Rodriguez. People who can end your career with a single phone call. My clients include 3 senators and half the defense contractors in Washington. One word from me and your promotion to general disappears forever." "Are you threatening me, Harrison?" Marcus asked quietly. "I'm giving you friendly advice. There are certain realities about how things work in this town. Some people matter more than others. Some families have earned the right to certain considerations. You can fight that system or you can work within it. Your choice." Marcus stood up, his decision already made. "I've spent my entire career fighting for soldiers who couldn't fight for themselves. I'm not about to stop now because some wealthy families think their money entitles them to special treatment." The meeting ended with Whitfield storming out, but not before promising that Marcus would regret his stubborn refusal to be reasonable. Within hours, the pressure campaign intensified. Articles appeared in military publications questioning Marcus's fitness for command. Anonymous sources suggested that his reforms were motivated by personal grudges rather than genuine concern for the Academy. But Marcus had something his critics hadn't counted on: the unwavering support of the cadets and younger faculty members who had been waiting for someone with the courage to make necessary changes. His reforms were working. Academic standards were rising, incidents of misconduct were decreasing, and the atmosphere at the Academy was becoming more professional and respectful. More importantly, Marcus had the support of his military superiors who had sent him to fix the Academy in the first place. They understood that real reform was impossible without challenging entrenched interests, and they were prepared to back him up as long as he produced results. The turning point came when 3 cadets who had previously been too frightened to report serious hazing incidents came forward, with detailed accounts of abuse. Their testimony led to the expulsion of several students from prominent families and the resignation of 2 instructors who had failed to take appropriate action. The media coverage of these expulsions was intense, but it began to shift in Marcus's favor when the full extent of the previous problems became public knowledge. Parents of current and prospective cadets expressed support for his reforms. Military leaders praised his courage in tackling difficult but necessary changes. 6 months after taking command, Marcus received a visit from the Secretary of Defense. The meeting was brief but significant. "Colonel, I want you to know that your work here has been exceptional," the Secretary said. "The Academy is already showing dramatic improvement in every measurable category. More importantly, you've restored public confidence in this institution." "Thank you, sir. But there's still more work to be done." "Actually, there is. The President has approved your promotion to Brigadier General, effective immediately, and we have a new assignment for you. "We want you to take command of the 82nd Airborne Division." Marcus felt a moment of pure satisfaction. The 82nd Airborne was one of the military's most elite units, and commanding it would put him in line for even higher positions. But more than personal advancement, the promotion represented vindication for every principle he had fought to uphold. That evening, as he prepared to hand over command of the academy to his successor, Marcus walked through the grounds one final time. The place looked the same as it had during his cadet years, but he knew it was fundamentally different. The culture of entitlement and privilege that had once made life difficult for students like him had been replaced by a renewed focus on merit and character. In his final address to the cadets, Marcus spoke about the true meaning of military service and the responsibilities that came with leadership. His words were simple but powerful, drawn from years of experience in combat and command. "The uniform you wear represents something larger than yourself," he told the assembled cadets. "It represents every person who has ever served this country, regardless of where they came from or what their family name was. Your job is to be worthy of that honor, and to ensure that the people who follow you have the same opportunities to serve with distinction." As he left the academy for the final time as commandant, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him full circle. The boy who had been told he didn't belong had become the man responsible for ensuring that future generations would be judged by their character rather than their connections. The transformation was complete, but the real test was still to come. In just a few weeks, Brigadier General Marcus Rodriguez would take command of one of the military's most prestigious units, and with it, the opportunity to influence military culture on a much larger scale. The janitor's son had proven that he belonged. Now he was in a position to help others prove the same thing about themselves. Field, now a successful defense contractor with significant political connections, requested a private meeting. He arrived at the academy in an expensive car, accompanied by a lawyer and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Whitfield had not aged well. Success in business had made him wealthy, but it hadn't given him the satisfaction he had expected from life. His military career had been unremarkable, and he had left service after achieving only modest rank. Watching Marcus's meteoric rise had been a constant source of frustration and resentment. "Marcus," Whitfield said, settling into the commandant's office with practiced familiarity, "I hear you're causing quite a stir around here. Maybe it's time to remember where you came from and show some gratitude to the institution that made you what you are." Marcus studied his former tormentor with calm interest. The years had given him perspective on their old conflicts, and he felt no anger or resentment. Instead, he saw a man who had never learned to earn what he wanted through his own efforts. "Harrison, I remember exactly where I came from," Marcus replied. "That's why I understand what this place is supposed to represent. And that's why I won't let anyone destroy its mission, regardless of their family name or political connections." 5 years later, Major General Marcus Rodriguez stood before the largest military gathering in recent memory. The ceremony taking place at Arlington National Cemetery was unprecedented in its scope and significance. Representatives from every branch of the military, foreign dignitaries and senior government officials had assembled to witness something that would be remembered as a defining moment in military history. Marcus had reached heights that even his most optimistic supporters could never have imagined. As the commanding general of the 8th Airborne Corps, he oversaw more than 100,000 soldiers across multiple divisions. His innovative approaches to military strategy and personnel management had revolutionized how the modern army operated. Under his leadership, recruitment had increased, retention had improved, and operational effectiveness had reached new levels. But success hadn't changed the fundamental principles that had guided him since his cadet days. Marcus remained accessible to soldiers at every level, maintained the same high personal standards that had earned him respect throughout his career, and never forgot the struggles that had shaped his character. His leadership style, once considered unconventional, had become the model that other commanders sought to emulate. The ceremony at Arlington was ostensibly about honoring military innovation and leadership excellence. Marcus was receiving the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Pentagon's highest non-combat award, in recognition of his transformative impact on military culture and effectiveness. But everyone present understood that this moment represented something much more significant than a routine awards ceremony. As Marcus approached the podium to address the assembly, he noticed familiar faces throughout the crowd, former subordinates who had risen through the ranks, academy classmates who had followed different paths to their own successes, and instructors who had played roles in his development decades earlier. His parents sat in the front row, his mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief while his father maintained the stoic composure that had carried their family through so many challenges. The Secretary of Defense, now a close friend and ally, introduced Marcus with words that captured the magnitude of his achievements. Ladies and gentlemen, it is rare in any generation to witness a career that fundamentally changes an institution. Major General Rodriguez has not only excelled in every assignment he has received, but has transformed the very nature of military leadership in the process. But as Marcus began his acceptance speech, movement in the crowd caught his attention. A group of elderly veterans, some using wheelchairs and walking aids, were struggling to rise to their feet. These were men who had served in conflicts spanning 7 decades, from World War II through recent operations in the Middle East. Their effort to stand, despite physical limitations and advancing age, created a ripple effect throughout the ceremony. One by one, every person in attendance began to rise. Active duty soldiers, retired officers, government officials, and foreign dignitaries all stood in a show of respect that transcended rank, nationality, and political affiliation. The silence was profound, as thousands of people paid tribute not just to Marcus's individual achievements, but to what his story represented about the possibilities inherent in military service. Marcus paused his prepared remarks, visibly moved by the unexpected display. In that moment, he was transported back to his first day at the academy, when he had stood alone and uncertain, wondering if he truly belonged among the assembled cadets. The contrast between that frightened young man and the general receiving honors at the nation's most sacred military site was almost overwhelming. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus spotted a familiar figure in the crowd. Harrison Whitfield, now in his 60s and using a cane, had somehow obtained access to the ceremony. His face showed the weight of years spent watching his former classmates' meteoric rise, while his own life had been marked by mediocrity and missed opportunities. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Marcus saw something he had never expected to see from his old tormentor: respect, perhaps even admiration. Harrison nodded slightly, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge everything that had passed between them, and everything that Marcus had ultimately achieved, despite his efforts to undermine him. When Marcus resumed his speech, his words carried the weight of personal experience and hard-won wisdom. He spoke about the nature of military service, the importance of judging people by their character rather than their circumstances, and the obligation of leaders to create opportunities for others to excel. "When I first put on a uniform," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent assembly, "people told me I didn't belong. They said military leadership required breeding, connections, and advantages I would never possess. They were wrong about what military leadership requires, but they were right about one thing: I didn't belong in a military that valued those things above merit and character." He paused, looking out over the crowd of soldiers, veterans, and dignitaries who hung on his every word. "But this military, our military, is better than that. It's a place where a janitor's son can rise to command divisions, where courage matters more than connections, and where the only thing that ultimately counts is your willingness to serve something larger than yourself. That's the military I've been honored to serve, and that's the military we must continue to build for future generations." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire assembly erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. Veterans who had served in distant wars, young soldiers just beginning their careers, and senior officers who had worked alongside Marcus throughout his rise, all joined in recognizing not just his individual success, but the principles he represented. But the moment that would be remembered by everyone present came as Marcus concluded his remarks and prepared to leave the podium. The crowd of elderly veterans who had struggled to stand earlier began a slow, rhythmic clapping. Others joined in, creating a thunderous ovation that echoed across the cemetery grounds. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, every uniformed service member in attendance came to attention and rendered a simultaneous salute. Thousands of hands rose in perfect synchronization, creating a visual display of respect and solidarity that brought tears to the eyes of seasoned military professionals. Marcus returned the salute, with the same precision he had learned as a nervous cadet decades earlier, but now it carried the authority and dignity of someone who had earned every honor through dedication and sacrifice. The salute held for nearly a minute, a moment of pure military tradition that honored both his achievements and the institution that had made them possible. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Marcus was approached by a young lieutenant who looked remarkably like he had at the same age. The officer was clearly from a working-class background, his uniform impeccable but his manner slightly uncertain in the presence of so much senior leadership. "Sir," the lieutenant said nervously, "I wanted to thank you for what you said today. I'm from a small town in Ohio, and my dad works in a factory. Sometimes I wonder if I really belong here with all these officers from military families." Marcus studied the young man's face and saw his own younger self reflected there. The same determination, the same uncertainty, and the same burning desire to prove himself worthy of the uniform he wore. "Lieutenant," Marcus said, placing a hand on the younger officer's shoulder, "you belong wherever your courage and character can take you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the young officer walked away with renewed confidence, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Every challenge, every setback, and every person who had tried to convince him he wasn't good enough had ultimately contributed to his success. The boy who had been told he didn't belong had become a general whose story would inspire future generations of military leaders. That evening, at a private dinner with his family and closest friends, Marcus's father offered a toast that captured the significance of the day. "To my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who proved that in America it doesn't matter where you start. It only matters how far you're willing to go." The toast was echoed by everyone present, but Marcus knew that his real legacy wasn't the awards or the recognition. It was the knowledge that he had helped create a military where the next generation of leaders would be judged by their merit rather than their background. Major General Marcus Rodriguez had not only proven that he belonged, he had fundamentally changed what belonging meant for everyone who would follow in his footsteps. The janitor's son had become a general, and in doing so, had opened doors for countless others who were still fighting to prove they belonged. The salute he had received that day at Arlington wasn't just for him. It was for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough, and for everyone who would refuse to accept that limitation in the future.